The avoidant does not announce bonding. That is perhaps the most important thing to understand before examining what the bonding actually sounds like when it surfaces. Because the expectation, shaped by the ordinary relational logic of how people communicate genuine attachment, would be that bonding produces the direct expression of it, that someone who is genuinely connected with another person says so, finds the words, communicates in whatever form is natural to them, that what is present between them matters. The avoidance bonding does not work that way. The direct expression of genuine attachment is precisely what the architecture was built to prevent. So when the bonding has genuinely occurred, when something in the avoidance interior has shifted past the comfortable, manageable, not pressing against the defended interior quality of ordinary connection, into the specific territory of genuine attachment, the expression of it does not take the form the ordinary relational logic would predict. It takes other forms, quieter ones, more indirect, forms that carry the genuine information without the direct vulnerability that genuine expression would require, forms that the person receiving them may not immediately recognize as the significant signals they actually are. Learning to read those forms accurately is genuinely useful, not as a strategy for managing the dynamic, as the honest, clear-eyed understanding of what is actually being communicated, in a register the empath may not have been taught to read. The first thing an avoidant says when they have already bonded to someone is something that sounds almost unremarkably small. They remember. Not in the obvious, I was paying attention way of someone who is consciously demonstrating their interest, in the specific, detailed, this came up weeks ago and you mentioned it way, of someone whose interior has been holding the other person in a particular kind of attentive presence, without necessarily acknowledging to themselves that it has. The avoidant who has bonded to someone does not remember everything about everyone. Their attention is not indiscriminately retentive. What they retain is specific to what their interior has been genuinely engaged with. And when they reference something small, something the person mentioned in passing, something that did not seem significant enough to merit deliberate retention, something that required a quality of genuine attention to even register, that reference is the evidence of what the interior has actually been doing, holding the person. Not in the acknowledged, I am thinking about you way of someone who has admitted the attachment to themselves. In the prior, pre-acknowledged, the attention is there before the admission is, way of genuine bonding that has not yet been fully processed into conscious recognition. The remembering is the bonding's evidence. The specific, particular, this is not generic social attention, quality of retention, that indicates the person has been present in the avoidance interior, in a way that ordinary connections are not. The second thing an avoidant says when they have bonded is harder to detect, because it tends to arrive in the form of something that sounds like a question, but is functioning as something else. They ask about the specific texture of the person's life, not the generic social questions of how are you or what have you been up to, the specific ones. The ones that reference the particular details of the person's actual life, their specific work, their specific interests, the specific things they have mentioned caring about, and that reveal, in their specificity, that the avoidant has been genuinely attending to who the person actually is, rather than to the social presentation of who they are. A question like this, how did that thing you were working on turn out? Not what was it called, but the actual substance of it, is not the question of someone running through the social script of interested engagement. It is the question of someone whose interior has been in genuine contact with the actual person, who knows enough about the specific texture of the person's life to ask about the specific thing rather than the generic version. The avoidant does not ask these questions because they have decided to demonstrate their bonding. They ask them because the genuine interest produced by genuine bonding is simply present and expressing itself in the form of the questions that genuine interest naturally generates. The questions are the bonding speaking in the only voice it currently has access to, not the direct voice of acknowledged attachment, the genuine interest voice of someone who has been paying real attention without having fully acknowledged to themselves why. The third signal is the one that tends to be most surprising when it is recognized for what it is. The avoidant who has bonded to someone will, at specific moments, say something that is more honest than they typically allow themselves to be. Not a declaration, not the sudden, unburdening expression of everything they have been holding. Something smaller and more significant than that. A moment where the management is slightly less efficient than usual, and something true comes through in a form that is direct enough to be unmistakable. It might be the acknowledgement of a feeling that the avoidant's usual communication style would not permit. Something like, "That actually mattered to me." Or the honest expression of a preference that reveals the specific investment. "I would rather you were here for this." Or the unguarded reference to the future that includes the person in it without the qualifier that the management would typically insert. When we do that, not if we do that. These moments tend to be brief. The management reasserts quickly. The avoidant often moves past what was just said with a naturalness that makes it possible to miss, continues the conversation, redirects the topic, does not pause to acknowledge what just came through. But it came through. And the person who was genuinely present in the moment, not the performing attentiveness present, but the actually there present, felt the specific quality of something that was more honest than the management usually permits. That honesty is the bonding making itself visible in the one available instant when the management was momentarily less vigilant than usual. The fourth thing the avoidant says when they have bonded is perhaps the most counterintuitive. They say something that acknowledges difficulty, their own difficulty, not in the form of the vulnerable confession, the direct "I am struggling with this" expression that genuine emotional openness produces, in the form of the oblique reference, the sideways acknowledgement, the mention of something hard in a register that is slightly more honest than the self-sufficient narrative typically allows. The avoidant, who has not bonded, maintains the self-sufficiency narrative with considerable consistency. Everything is managed. The interior is handled. The presentation is of someone who is fundamentally okay with their own conditions. The avoidant who has bonded to someone tends, in that person's specific presence, to allow the narrative to slip slightly, to reference something that was difficult in a way that does not frame it as fully managed, to say something that implies the existence of an interior that has genuine contact beyond what the self-sufficiency narrative acknowledges. This happens because the bonding has created a specific felt quality of safety in the avoidance experience of the person, not the full, conscious, "I trust this person with my vulnerability" safety of someone who has made a deliberate decision to open. The prior, pre-deliberate, the interior relaxes slightly in this person's presence safety of genuine bonding beginning to affect the management's efficiency. The management is slightly less total in the presence of someone the avoidant has genuinely bonded to, and in that slight reduction of totality, slightly more honest things come through. The fifth signal is relational rather than verbal. It is what the avoidant does rather than says, though it tends to accompany specific things being said. They make themselves slightly more available than their pattern typically produces. Not consistently. The inconsistency remains characteristic of the avoidance engagement regardless of bonding. But in specific conditions, in specific moments, there is a quality of availability that exceeds what the pattern would generate without the bonding present. They respond slightly faster. They extend conversations slightly longer. They initiate contact in conditions where the pattern would typically wait for the other person to initiate. They show up slightly more than usual in the ordinary spaces where showing up is not required, but where the genuine orientation of the bonded interior makes the showing up the natural expression of what is actually present. These exceedances of the pattern's usual output are small, are easy to miss or to explain away, are not the dramatic, obvious demonstrations of increased investment that the ordinary relational logic of bonding would predict. But they are there, in the aggregate, in the honest accounting of what is different about the avoidance engagement with this specific person versus their engagement with connections where bonding has not occurred. The aggregate shows something, not the adequate showing up of genuine mutual presence. That would require the closing of the gap that the pattern produces, but the evidence of genuine bonding pressing against the pattern's defaults, and occasionally exceeding them in the small, specific, this person specifically ways that genuine interior orientation produces. What to do with the accurate reading of these signals is the genuinely important question, and it has a genuinely honest answer that may not be the answer the framing of the script suggests. The accurate reading of the bonding signals is valuable, is worth understanding, prevents the specific, damaging confusion of misreading the avoidant's genuine bonding as indifference, the confusion that leads to the person questioning what they experienced, doubting the reality of the connection, wondering whether the genuine moments were constructed. They were not constructed. The bonding is real. The signals are the evidence of genuine interior attachment that the management is simultaneously trying to contain. But the accurate reading of the bonding signals does not change the fundamental situation that has been the honest concern of this entire conversation. The bonding is real, and the behavioral expression is insufficient. Those two things coexist in the avoidance interior with the specific, unresolved tension that has been examined throughout. And the person receiving the bonding signals, however accurately they read them, deserves more than the interior bonding, whose behavioral expression remains inadequate. Deserves the showing up, deserves the ordinary days, deserves the consistent, present warmth as baseline engagement that genuine bonding, if it is to mean anything receivable, must eventually find its way into expressing. The bonding is the beginning of the information. What the avoidant does with it, whether it becomes the motivation for the genuine work that closes the gap between interior attachment and adequate behavioral expression, is the rest of the information. And the rest of the information lives, as always, in the ordinary days, in the unremarkable hours, in the behavior when nothing in particular is requiring it to be anything. The bonding happened. That is real. What happens next is the question that matters, and its answer belongs entirely to what the avoidant chooses to do with what has already, without planning, genuinely occurred in their interior. While the person lives their life, completely, in the ordinary days that are the whole of it, the bonding signals, once recognized, tend to reorganize how the person has been understanding the entire dynamic. That is worth sitting with honestly, rather than moving past quickly. Because the reorganization is real, and it has a specific quality. Looking back at the connection with the accurate understanding of what the bonding signals were communicating, with the knowledge that the remembering and the specific questions, and the moments of unguarded honesty, and the slight availability exceedances were the interior attachment expressing itself in the only forms available to it, the dynamic looks different than it looked before the understanding arrived. What looked like inconsistency looks, in retrospect, more coherent. The warmth that arrived and then was managed back. The moments of genuine contact, followed by the characteristic distance. The specific instances where something more honest than the management typically permits came through before the management reasserted. These were not the arbitrary fluctuations of someone who was uncertain about what they wanted. They were the pattern of genuine bonding pressing against the architecture that was containing it. The interior attachment repeatedly seeking expression, and the defense repeatedly redirecting the expression to something more manageable. That retroactive coherence is meaningful. It changes the story from one of inconsistency or mixed signals, or someone who did not know what they wanted, into the more accurate story of someone who genuinely bonded, and whose bonding could not find adequate behavioral form because the architecture surrounding it was preventing the adequate expression. But here is where the honest examination of the retroactive coherence requires genuine care, because the reorganization, the looking back and seeing the bonding signals clearly, can produce a specific and understandable response in the person who has been living in the confusion of the dynamic. It can produce the feeling of having been close to something that was almost within reach, the sense that the genuine bonding was there all along, and what prevented its adequate expression was not the absence of genuine feeling, but the architecture surrounding it. The implication that the right conditions, the person doing the right things, the timing being different, some specific variable being altered, might have produced different behavioral expression from the same genuine interior bonding. That feeling is understandable, and it deserves honest examination rather than immediate validation or immediate dismissal. The honest examination produces this. The architecture is not a circumstantial variable. It is not something that changes based on the other person doing different things, or the timing being better, or some specific condition being met that was not met in this case. It is a structural feature of the avoidance psychology, built from early experience, embedded in the nervous system at a level that does not respond to the external conditions of the relationship in the way that circumstantial variables respond. The bonding was real regardless of the architecture, and the architecture continued to prevent adequate expression regardless of the bonding. Those two things coexisted throughout the dynamic, and would have continued to coexist in any version of the dynamic that did not involve the avoidant's own genuine, sustained, internally motivated engagement with the interior work of changing the architecture. The retroactive coherence of the bonding signals does not mean the connection was close to becoming something different. It means the connection was consistently what it actually was, real bonding in an interior that could not adequately express it. Consistently, not almost adequately in some moments, consistently, at the same level of real but insufficiently expressed throughout. Receiving that honest account is its own form of grief, the grief of the retroactive clarity, of understanding now what was happening throughout in a way that confirms both the reality of the connection and the structural nature of what was preventing it from becoming what it deserved to become. That grief deserves space, is not the same as the acute grief of the ending, is quieter, more reflective, more oriented toward the full picture than toward the acute loss. The grief of someone who has understood something completely and is sitting with the fullness of what the complete understanding contains. The complete understanding contains the genuine bonding, and it contains the sufficient to have produced the bonding, insufficient to have produced adequate expression nature of the avoidance current development. Both of those things, completely, without either one being inflated beyond its actual significance or diminished below it. What tends to happen after the retroactive clarity settles is a specific shift in how the person relates to the bonding signals going forward. Not in the conditions of the past dynamic, that is over or changed or suspended in whatever form it is taken, but in future dynamics, in future encounters with people whose bonding signals they are now better equipped to read accurately. The person who has developed the ability to read avoidant bonding signals is not destined to encounter avoidance indefinitely. The reading is a perceptual skill that operates across dynamics, not only in avoidant ones. It is the skill of attending to what is actually present in another person's engagement, rather than what is being explicitly communicated, of reading the texture of the ordinary moments, rather than the content of the significant ones, of noticing what is retained, what is referenced, what produces the slight, specific, this person specifically exceedances of a person's ordinary engagement pattern. That skill serves the person in all relational contexts, not only in the reading of avoidant bonding, in the reading of all bonding, in the accurate detection of genuine interior attachment in anyone whose expression of it is less direct than the ordinary relational logic would predict. And genuine interior attachment that is less directly expressed is not exclusively the avoidance territory. Many people, across the full spectrum of attachment styles, across different temperaments and different relational histories, express genuine bonding through the indirect channels before the direct expression becomes available. The remembering, the specific questions, the unguarded moments of unusual honesty, the slight availability exceedances. The person who has learned to read these signals accurately has developed a genuine perceptual asset, one that allows them to notice genuine bonding when it is present, without requiring its direct announcement, to receive the communication in the form it is actually taking, rather than in the form the ordinary relational logic would predict. The difference between reading bonding signals accurately in an avoidant context and reading them accurately in other contexts is significant. In the avoidant context, the accurate reading of the bonding signals coexists with the honest assessment of what the bonding has been producing in behavior. The signals indicate real interior attachment. The behavior indicates insufficient expression. The gap between them is the pattern's signature and the central concern of this conversation. In other contexts, with people who have done more genuine interior work, whose attachment architecture does not systematically prevent adequate behavioral expression of genuine interior feeling, the accurate reading of bonding signals tends to be followed by the behavioral confirmation of what the signals indicated. The remembering tends to be accompanied by the consistent showing up. The specific questions tend to be accompanied by the genuine interest extending into sustained engagement. The unguarded, honest moments tend to be followed by more of them, rather than by the management reasserting and reducing them to the exception. The person who has developed the perceptual skill of reading bonding signals accurately will be able to feel the difference between these two conditions. Will be able to distinguish between the bonding that is present in the interior and producing insufficient behavioral expression because the architecture is preventing it, and the bonding that is present in the interior and finding its way into the behavior because the architecture is not systematically preventing it. That distinction is perhaps the most practically useful perceptual skill available in navigating intimate connection, more useful in some ways than the reading of the bonding signals themselves, because the bonding signals tell you that genuine attachment has occurred. The behavior, in the ordinary conditions, tells you whether the genuine attachment is able to find the expression it needs to find, to be something you can actually build a life alongside. Genuine attachment that finds adequate behavioral expression feels qualitatively different from genuine attachment that cannot. The difference is not always immediately obvious in the acute phase of the bonding, the early period, when the genuine interior attachment is most activated and is producing the bonding signals most clearly. In the acute phase, both conditions can feel similar. The remembering is present, the specific questions are present, the unguarded, honest moments are present, the slight availability exceedances are present. The difference becomes visible in the medium and longer term, in the ordinary days, in the texture of the engagement across the unremarkable hours when nothing particular is requiring the bonding to express itself in any particular way. In the avoidant context, the ordinary days reveal the gap. The bonding signals that were present in the acute phase do not translate into the consistent warmth as baseline, ordinary days presence that genuine mutual connection requires. The remembering continues, but the showing up does not. The specific questions continue, but the sustained, genuine engagement does not. The unguarded, honest moments remain the exception, rather than becoming the baseline quality of the communication. In the context of genuine attachment that is finding adequate expression, the ordinary days reveal the confirmation. The bonding signals of the acute phase are followed by their behavioral equivalent in the ordinary conditions. The remembering is accompanied by the showing up. The genuine interest of the specific questions is accompanied by the sustained engagement that genuine interest naturally sustains. The unguarded honesty of the acute phase becomes more available rather than less as the ordinary conditions replace the heightened ones. The person who has been through the avoidant dynamic and has developed the perceptual skill of reading bonding signals accurately is in the best available position to make that distinction, has the specific experiential knowledge of what each condition feels like from the inside, has lived in the context where the bonding signals were present and the behavioral confirmation was insufficient, knows from the body rather than the theory what that specific gap feels like in the texture of the ordinary days, and therefore knows when the ordinary days begin to reveal something different, when the bonding signals of the acute phase are being confirmed rather than contradicted by the ordinary conditions, what that confirmation actually is and what it means. It means the gap is not there in the same way. It means the interior attachment is finding behavioral expression that corresponds to it. It means the architecture is not systematically preventing the adequate expression of what is genuinely present. That recognition, felt before thought, registered in the body before the mind has fully processed it, is the specific, practically valuable product of the avoidant dynamic's specific and costly education. Not the education that was sought, not the education that was worth the cost in any straightforward sense, but the education that was produced. The genuine, experientially confirmed body level knowledge of what genuine mutual presence feels like and what its structural absence feels like. The ability to feel the difference between the two before being fully deceived by either, that ability is real, is the person's own, is not contingent on the avoidant's eventual development or the connection's eventual resolution. It belongs to the person who developed it through the specific, unglamorous, genuinely costly experience of loving someone whose genuine bonding could not find its adequate behavioral form. And it continues to develop, continues to deepen through the continued, honest, genuinely inhabited engagement with the actual life and the actual connections it contains in the ordinary days that are the whole of it.